Hello, my name is Charles Feldman.
And my name is Ela Edgar, and we're in the middle of a technology bump. And so I just have to get the giggles out for a second. But Charles, go ahead. Why don't you set it up? We have a lovely guest with us today.
Yes, we do. We have our friend Andy Vasily. He's been on our show before. Brilliant human being, wonderful person. He is coming to us from Antwerp, Belgium. Um, and so we're looking forward to a great conversation. What we're going to talk about today stems from essentially the idea that trust building is a competency. It's something that can be learned, it can be developed, we can get better at it. And we learn it initially in our families. So, whatever we learn about building trust and being trustworthy and trusting others, we start to learn it there. Sometimes we learn that well in our families, and other people maybe not so much. So, the question we're coming with today, and what we want to explore with Andy, is how do people who don't learn well how to build trust, how to be trustworthy and trust others safely and wisely, how do they learn that later in life? So let me just introduce Andy, and hopefully we're recording all of this, so what he says will come across to all of you. Um, Andy, you want to just say a few words about yourself before we jump into our topic?
Yes, sure. So, firstly, yeah, great to reconnect with you both, and I really appreciate being on the show again. And uh, the topic today is really important to me. And uh, Charles, you and I talked about it behind the scenes a few weeks ago, and then we decided to record this. And just based on my own life growing up, trust was not present, and it wasn't modeled. I didn't understand anything about it, and I think my upbringing was more based in fear in the household and lots of fear and uncertainty. So when your essential needs of love and belonging are not in place, it can be very difficult to trust others and to learn how to be trustful yourself growing up. So the theme is really important to me, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And we'll get to that. I just want to say that towards the end of the conversation, we'll get some more information for you about how you can get in touch with Andy if you'd like to. But let's start with the quote, Andy, that you gave to us, shared with us earlier before we started recording from Mother Teresa.
Sure. So quotes, I write them down all the time. I'm sure that you both do as well. You hear a quote, you write it down. And I was on a run in Antwerp, Belgium, and I was listening to a podcast with, I'm forgetting, Robin Sharma, the monk who's sold his Ferrari, and he's written a bunch of bestsellers. And what Robin Sharma quoted from Mother Teresa was, if each of us would just sweep our own doorstep, the whole world would be clean. And I literally almost stopped in my tracks, and I was like, I need to write that down. And I wrote it down in my notes on my iPhone and kept running. And I really reflected on that quote. And it's such a beautiful metaphor for the internal work we all need to do to better understand ourselves. So even though I've been on the path of healing mentally and emotionally over the last 10, 15 years, and I've done a lot of work, I'm still trying to grow and learn. So that quote really resonated with me, and I put it up on my wall as a reminder. And I often share it in my own podcast with my guests to kind of unpack how that quote resonates with them based on their experiences. So when it comes to trust and distrust, I think that quote is a perfect metaphor for the work that we need to do to develop our self-awareness and to better understand how we're showing up, and to understand our triggers and what gets in the way of us, living a life where we trust others more, and we understand the importance of trust, and we value it, and we want to be trustful in our own actions. So I'll leave it at that for now, but I'd love to know what resonates with the both of you in regards to that quote.
I'm holding my breath. Um, I love that. I love that quote. It's absolutely beautiful. So it is inviting me to be compassionate to myself because my doorstep isn't particularly clean right now, although I have been doing a lot of deep interpersonal work. But it also reminds me as I figuratively walk around my neighborhood not to be so harsh with other people's doorsteps, and that compassion, that empathy, that, you know, some days we're rock stars and other days less than sparkly and everything in between. And there's we were talking about before we were recording some of the verses that I've been writing, and one of them that I just wrote is entitled Shallow. And sometimes it's exhausting, overwhelming, and really hard to do deep work all the time. And so shallow invites us to actually dial down the intensity of what we're working on and allow us to come out and breathe and pause a little bit before we go back in. And so if we're doing that intentionally, then can we also have compassion that other people may need to do the same?
I would say very much the same kind of thing that quote brings up for me. Cleaning, making sure my own doorstep is clean, making sure my own house is clean. That's all that I can do. I can't go tell other people. I can tell them, but I can't make them clean their own doorsteps. I can only clean mine. And so first of all, having self-compassion, because, you know, getting into that stuff, that learning, uh, deeper work can be messy and can leave my house and my doorstep pretty messed up for a little while sometimes, before it gets better, before I move on to the next. And the same thing may be happening with others. And even if it isn't, that's how the world is. And being able to accept that is part of the journey. So, Andy, if we can start here, you had said that you did not learn to be trusting or trusting of others, and perhaps even trustworthy, fully trustworthy yourself in your family as you were growing up. So, how did you even become aware of trust as a domain of concern?
I think, the work I've done has helped me understand the emotional dysregulation I was experiencing when I was young. And when I say young, I mean up into my teens and 20s, and being emotionally dysregulated all the time, trying to figure out life and trying to figure out your purpose and what you're meant to do. But also, I felt I was a very people-oriented person, but my actions were not very trustworthy. I didn't understand trust. I didn't follow through on commitments oftentimes. And, when you're experiencing a life like that, you go into defensive mode and making up excuses and stories about why you're not trustful, right? So I'm not saying it happened all the time, but there are moments when, through this reflective journey, when I look back at my life, there were definitely times I didn't show up and I didn't commit to what I was saying I was going to do, and it impacted some relationships. And I was able to rebuild a lot of those relationships, but there are some relationships that were never rebuilt, and that's just part of life. We live, we learn, we grow, we do our best. And as you just said, sometimes we're overwhelmed with chaos in our lives, and that's what it was like for me growing up. It was chaotic. I was not safe, in the house, and I was the youngest in the family, so that was probably my saving grace in a way because I was left alone. But Gabor Mate, who we know his work, Dr. Gabor Mate, if you don't, any of the listeners, I highly recommend just doing a search and watching his videos and getting your hands on any of his books. But what he talks about is trauma is not what happened to you, but what happened inside of you as a result of the trauma, right? And then conversely, he also says it's the things that should have happened that didn't, the love, the belonging, the trust, right? The connection. So it's the things that should have happened that didn't. I experienced both of those things. So, Ela, you talk about self-compassion, I'm sometimes drawn to tears when I reflect on the past, and thinking about the person I was and who I'm striving to be now. And being self-compassionate was the first thing. But for me, I think to answer your question, Charles, it was leaving Canada. My wife and I left Canada in 1997. We moved to Japan, and it was suddenly seeing this whole new world of possibilities and seeing different cultures and, from then, and I said this on the last show, we've lived in 6 different countries. We've experienced so many wonderful things and met so many beautiful people. And I think that was the starting point for me to build the life I wanted and to strive to be the person that I wanted to be. And that's when the learning journey really began. So that's it. Hopefully not a long-winded answer, but to the point on that pivotal moment was moving away and finding my own life and my own value.
I hear that. So there is that pivotal moment, and sometimes that moment it happens over some period of time, like months or years even. But it is you. I think what I'm hearing is you look back and you can see that time period where that change happened for you, that you began to say, and in a sense, declared for yourself, I want to be able to trust. I want to be trustworthy in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to tag onto that, and Eli, I want your thoughts on this as well, is, I've shared behind the scenes with you both my near-death experience in Cambodia, and that was a pivotal moment that shook me to the core. And that's when, maybe I found God, and I don't mean that in a religious sense, but more a spiritual sense. And I knew that I needed to continue to do the work. And that was a real moment for me when I started to deeply invest in the journey. And it's been so worth it. But Ela, what comes up for you when you hear Charles and I share what we did?
I want to say right away that I'm in this moment so grateful to be able to have conversations like this with people who are so willing to be courageous and vulnerable and share where you've been, where you've come from, what you've experienced. It's something that I notice doesn't happen in all conversations. So I'm deeply grateful when I'm able to be part of one that is. I think I was giggling a little bit inside, and we talked about this briefly before we started recording, that I grew up not distrusting and not being fearful, but being completely naive and completely blind. And we're planning a family trip. We're leaving in a couple of weeks. And I'm recalling a similar trip I took with my mom when I was 13. And so, like, we'll put some context. That was a lot of years ago. So there's no internet. There's we're not walking around with smartphones. And quite literally, I remember arriving in the Salzburg train station. And it's, kind of dinner time. And we don't know anyone. She hasn't booked us anywhere to stay. And we're literally just figuring it out moment by moment. And my mom enters into a conversation with someone standing nearby, basically explains our situation, that we've just arrived in Salzburg and we're looking for a place to stay. And these lovely humans invite us over for dinner and then invite us to stay. And so we did. And that's just one example that happened multiple times during our trip. And so that was normal to me. Like, why wouldn't you go into a complete stranger's house? Why wouldn't you, stay for dinner? Why wouldn't you spend the night? Like, of course, this is normal. And yet it's not really. It's not really. And so not only on that trip, but multiple times in my life, I can recall and think back situations that could have gone really badly for us. And they didn't. So universe, thank you for taking care of us. But it didn't help me to learn how to assess risk or how to make prudent choices around activities or relationships or choices in my life. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm sitting with that.
Thank you, Hila. Yeah, that's different, in a very different way of learning about trust and trustworthiness and trusting others and being safe or not, trusting wisely, in other words. Yeah. I know for me, my family was pretty, I think I learned a lot about positive about trust. And at the same time, there were secrets in the background that my parents, and especially my father, had. And although I didn't know that explicitly, I could feel it under the surface. And so my response to a lot of that was to keep my own secrets, basically not share with other people, which is not a very not a very trustworthy way to be with people you want to be intimate with and care for and care about. So I learned to stuff all that down inside and, kind of keep my own counsel and not really share much with other people. Um, and so that was kind of the way I learned about being trustworthy and trusting others, is just to keep it all under wraps.
Can I ask you a question with that? Was that a sense of, so when you weren't sharing, was it, when you look back at that time, was that a defensive state? Did you feel guarded?
Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay.
But it wasn't around a lot of fear. It was just at least explicitly, there was not a lot of fear. There was just this sense that there were secrets, and I didn't really want to know what those secrets were. And I had my own secrets. So, but anyway, I'm going to get back to that learning though, of because that's really what we want to explore is how do we learn? Um, I think both of you know that I am a co-facilitator actually on a program. It's a year-long program for men who are in state prison here in California, in a prison near where I live. And the program is essentially taking these men through both becoming fully accountable for the crimes they committed, which in most cases was murder in some form, but also understanding what happened for them as when they were young, that got them to the point where they did what they did. And pretty much every one of them did not learn to trust in their homes. They were not safe in their homes. The people who were supposed to love and care for them, their caregivers, parents or older siblings or other people that were supposed to be foster care people, whatever, were not trustworthy themselves. Um, and yet somehow, somewhere along the line, these people realized that they wanted to change. And that's what you were describing that point, Andy, yourself, that you reached that point where you knew you wanted to change. So what allowed you then to change? How did you kind of, go, okay, I want to change. I want to become better at building trust. I want to become, a really trustworthy person, and trust others well. How did you actually learn that? What were who were your guides in that?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. I think for me, I started to really lean on people, mentors, and share my story with them. And I think trusting that there are people you can lean on and to actively invite them into your lives and to know that it's an opportunity, it's a door that's opened and I can walk through or not. And I chose after my accident, I chose to walk through all the doors. And maybe it was the universe bringing me these people in my life. Maybe, maybe not, but I believe it was. And oftentimes in life, we miss so many opportunities to connect with others. And that can be based on our own levels of trust, that you might immediately not trust someone. Therefore, you're not going to open yourself up to them. Literally, the doors of their home, Ela, like in Salzburg, right? So in your case, Ela, you walk through the door. And in life, I've chosen to walk through the doors and connect with people. And I wouldn't be connected with both of you had I not taken the chance to reach out to you, Charles, once I found your work and we've developed this relationship. And I consider you both mentors and I can talk to you about anything. And we've had so many great conversations behind the scenes. So it was my willingness to let the guard down. And instead of looking at life through the lens of being defensive and not trusting, I chose to look at the world in a different light, especially after my accident, to know that there's so much good in the world, right? I get
I
a
love
little
it.
emotional talking about it, but there really is so much good in the world. And I think that's the first step. to understand and forgive ourselves. You know, that was a big thing for me, to kind of forgive myself for the person that I was. And I wasn't a bad person. I just to forgive myself for some of the things I went through and some of my ways of showing up in the world. And I think that act of self-forgiveness really served me. And I started to build on that, and I started to learn as much as I could about it through my work, and now that's the work I've devoted myself to, is really understanding as much as I can, but being there for others who, may need guidance as well.
Wonderful. Wow. What one of the things I'm hearing here is that um, what became willing to do, and in fact actually went out and did on a regular basis, was allow yourself to be vulnerable
Yeah.
in the world. Um, and there's a lot of conversation around that word these days. Being vulnerable in the workplace is often considered a weakness. And actually, not just in the workplace, but in the world in general, it's considered a weakness. We're supposed to go through the world heavily armed. And what I hear you saying is you disarmed yourself and
Yeah.
allowed yourself to be vulnerable
Yeah.
so that you could walk through those doors, so you could open to people and accept that. Yeah, it's great. And it was in part where you almost died in Cambodia,
Yeah.
part of that, but I suspect it was some things that came before that as well. Can you articulate that at all?
Yeah. So again, I think I was starting to understand the neuroscience of behavior as well, and understanding that, we store trauma and we store it in many different ways, and our brain is built to protect us, right? And I think it was understanding some of our habitual ways of showing up. And for me, it was really double clicking on that and understanding my experiences, especially as I moved into leadership as well. And before moving into leadership, this fear of leadership, and really going, what the hell is going on with this? Why am I feeling like I always need to justify myself and rationalize, and knowing that inside I just feel like a tight band across my chest, anxiety, and I think it was starting to really explore why those things were happening, and why I was showing up that way. I mean, the leaders are just a person who are trying their best, but it was just this automatic default to not trusting authority. And that stems directly from, authority in the house, growing up. So I think that was my learning, and I was already on that journey when the accident happened. And then I think after the accident, I opened up spiritually to possibilities in my life. And then that uh, just kept me moving forward. So I think the work was already being done before the accident, but I was really, after the accident, really intrigued by relationships and what forms strong relationships, and to learn as much as I could about it. And then to start to, it's one thing to know it. I talk often about the head, the heart, the hands. We think with our head, and, the heart is everything we experience emotionally. We can read every book in the world, but if we're not going to use our hands and actually take action, then the knowledge we have isn't worth it. So I really look at it as taking action, and how can we take action, and it requires self accountability and to be accountable. And when we're not accountable, then we own it and we are transparent about it and we acknowledge it with others. And I think that begins to build a lot of trust. So when I started to take action, I started to feel stronger relationships in my life. And then that led me into leadership, and to help me develop a foundation that I want to uphold as a leader.
This is reminding me of, uh, I think, one of the turning points in my own experience, and being a leader at the University of Calgary and working with a fabulous group of humans, and realizing that, yes, I was very nice and I treated them really well. We had a lovely relationship, but in the background, I could feel that I was scattered, that I think I was quite ineffective. actually, because I was still trying to figure out how to do things on my own and not necessarily trusting my team and the competence they had in each of their individual roles. And I think that was kind of the first, like, oh, wait a minute. I think that there could be a different way, and that different way would start with me. It's not about them and fixing them. It's about, oh, I need to change my behaviors or start to pay more attention about how my behaviors are impacting others. And that was a big aha for me. And then coincidentally, not coincidentally, very shortly after, I started a formal coach training program where Dan Newby was the senior facilitator. We're just talking about Dan Newby and his wonderful work. And so I think, that if we go back to the quote at the beginning and how important developing that self-awareness is and realizing how our behaviors are building trust, causing trust wiggles, or potentially damaging trust, and how important it is to at some point go, oh, I see that, and then be willing to go and do something about it. Charles, do you have a moment for you or a time period where you're like, oh,
Yes. I think a lot of that had to do. So for me, one of the things that um, I have, I sought after much of my life was intimacy with other people, a sense of intimacy, of closeness, of deep friendship or love. And I was finding that I wasn't finding it in the way that I wanted it to be. And I think it was somewhere along the way, and for those people who are listening, probably some of you anyway know that I've been married 3 times. I'm on my 3rd marriage, and it's my last marriage. It's wonderful. The second marriage that I had is where I learned a lot about that, and it was that um, my second wife was willing to and able to kind of call me on some of my shit. In fact, a lot of my shit. And in doing so, um, I realized that I was holding myself back from being intimate by not, by keeping my own secrets, by keeping my own counsel. I don't even say secrets, although, there were a few things that I would say were secret in the sense that if somebody else knew them, I thought it would damage the relationship. Um, but yeah, it was a period of time in which I began to become aware that the intimacy with others that I really craved, I was never going to get as long as I was withholding, that I was not participating in fully and wholeheartedly in the relationship, which meant, not bearing my soul completely in every circumstance, but certainly being willing to be more transparent about myself emotionally, I think, as much as anything. Yeah.
I'm just, thank you for sharing that, Charles. I'm reminded of that Brene Brown talks about vulnerability isn't disclosure or oversharing.
Yeah.
Hmm.
That's not true vulnerability, right? That vulnerability is where, exactly as you're saying here, I'm willing to open and not continue to withhold and withdraw and keep secrets.
Yeah.
And that takes it takes so much courage to say, I am willing and want to share more of who I am than less of who I am.
Yes. And the courage comes from having to be courageous to do it in the face of fear that somehow I'm not going to measure up. People are not going to care about me, like me, love me if I do that. So it takes trying it a few times and finding out, oh, I was wrong about that. They actually do like me, love me better. Oh, my goodness. So,
Well, I wanted to add on there, and again, going back to quotes, I can't find the quote right now, and I might butcher it, but it's from Dr. Amy Edmondson. And what she talks about is every time we withhold, we rob ourselves and others of learning and growth, right? So that's what you're describing, Charles. You know, you withheld and you were robbing yourself and others of growth and learning and love and connection. So I'm grateful that you shared that, and Ela, you as well. And you know, when you think about leadership, and this is something like I have something written down here that I'm looking at, and what it says is workplace dynamics can mirror childhood trauma patterns. So childhood trauma with a parent can mirror relationships with a boss and employee. So in the work that you've both done, I'd love to know, because this is what I'm grappling with, is like, how do you facilitate conversations with leaders to help them understand what they've gone through, and their triggers might be holding them back from being more effective and from truly connecting with others and creating this sense of psychological safety in the workplace?
Yeah, that's a big question. And so I want to say full disclosure, um I am definitely not masterful at doing that. I would not say that that's something, check, I've figured it all out. I'm still a beginner and learning and soaking into not only understanding how my own upbringing has influenced me and impacted my behaviors. I think one of the things I have become more advanced at is actually modeling it myself. And so I am open about talking about, and when I'm in front of a room with leaders, facilitating with teams, intact teams, you know, I will share what's relevant and pertinent in order to support learning and growth. So I model it first and show that it's okay, or how do we also make it to be okay if we're going to support each other in our learning? So rather than creating, a safe container, how do we create an accountable space where we can share and learn and grow together? And what do we need in order to support that? And so some of the things that, I don't know, for me, I can feel a bit of, I'm not sure I would do that from other facilitators. It could be even cameras on or off. And I have this conversation with many organizations like, no, if you're going to do a session, it's mandatory cameras on. I'm like, well, actually, no. Because again, I want to support people's learning and growth. And maybe they're not comfortable, or maybe there's a really good reason why. So can we create engagement even if cameras are off? Yeah, we can. Or, everybody has to fully participate. What does that mean? What if my participation means that I'm really listening and I'm taking things in, but I'm not necessarily speaking and sharing? I'm okay with that. Right? And so it's all of these things where I think, again, building awareness and then building some skill and competence allow us to be in that space and hold and model for others. I don't know if that answered your question.
Absolutely. And Charles, I want to know your thoughts, but again, what Ela, I think what you're saying is that you share um, what you feel will provoke the audience into deeper thought, and it's an invitation, and rather than a demand, right? And you
Yes.
create that psychological. So I felt safe if I was in your workshop. I would feel safe in that approach. So whether or not I want to share, I don't have to. I can sit with
Mhm.
my thoughts. So what you're really doing is creating a space of differentiation. And a lot
Yes.
of workshops they're structured in a way where everybody does the same thing, but what you've created is differentiation to honor each learner and their learning style. So that's really important, and that's what came up for me when you shared that.
That's a good distinction and observation, Andy. Allowing people to, and honoring people for being themselves, at the same time, inviting them into the shared spaces
Yeah.
to come in as far as they possibly can. And for me, a lot of that has to do with creating sufficient safety so that people can feel uncomfortable and still proceed, still go forward. And people have different thresholds around that. There's sort of discomfort threshold and there's safety thresholds. So part of it is doing that, you know, and then I'm gonna say something that I've uh, have been experimenting with myself a little bit lately. Like I'm gonna say, like Ela, I'm not a master at creating that sense of safety and all of that. Still learning. Um, but I've heard, so one of my teachers, certainly the person I consider my coaching master teacher is Julio Olaya. He's he runs Newfield Network coach training program in the USA. And I actually am quite close with one of the people who was part of the program, and it was actually the only person that Julio ever really allowed to be in front of the room and run pieces of the program without him being in the room also, which is Carol Corsi. And Carol and I live close to each other, so we do a lot of things, including this prison work, by the way. The other day I was talking with Carol about Julio and how he did what he did and what she learned from him. And she said something that, not the other day, it's actually a little while ago, but she said something that really stood out for me. He was talking with her about how to hold the room. And he said, it's a room of maybe, 50, 60, 80 people in it. He said, what you need to do at the very beginning is you need to open your heart and send out love so that it reaches the people in the very back corners of the room. That sense of holding the room with love. And that may seem really woo-woo, but I'll tell you what, I've been trying it out and it really does what it does for me is it shifts the whole context for whatever I'm doing so that the context moves from, oh, I'm teaching these people or I'm helping them grow or whatever it is to I'm holding them in love and allowing them to experience whatever comes up in that loving space. And very different.
Do you feel a shift within yourself as you start?
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, that's the source of it. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm laughing a little bit at how coincidentally I wore this shirt today
There
Yes.
you
about
go.
love.
Love.
About love. Yeah. I love that you shared that, Charles. Loved that you shared that. And there's so much really great work around love in the workplace and extending love. Um, and I think it's again remembering that all of us live in a human experience. And some days super rock star, other days not so much, and everything in between is normal. That's called life. We're not supposed to be rock stars every single day, as much as that would be, well, actually it's exhausting. Exhausting. And if we think of, anyway, when we extend that compassion to ourselves, that self-awareness to ourselves about, my energy's low. Maybe I'm feeling loneliness, sadness, grief today. I'm going to hold that and take care of it, take care of me. And that allows me to also then not spill over onto someone else. And then can we also do that and hold others as maybe they're not their most sparkly self today? So genuinely extending that love and compassion to another human, no matter where they are.
And getting back to our main topic, trusting that as much as anything else that we trust in the process of the work we're doing, and trusting ourselves to be able to do that to the greatest extent we can.
Absolutely. And I think of Dan Newby's work with the Field Guide to 150 Emotions. And what he talks about is that we're built to be able to articulate maybe 20 to 25 emotions. But when we better understand all of the emotions and to be able to label them, it gives us this nuanced language to be able to better articulate what's happening for us. And that goes right back to the theme of the show and that idea of people showing up in the workplace and understanding their triggers and then sitting with the emotion and being able to name it in a transparent way. And I think that's a lot of literature out there talks about the importance of transparency in the workplace, and many workplaces lack transparency. And that usually stems from the top because it's not modeled or it's not embraced, right? So when there's a lack of transparency, people often don't know where they stand. And for me, that's the way it was for many years in the workplace was I didn't know where I stood, and then I started to make up stories, and then you go back to the your personal narrative from the past that you've built, and then putting a stop to that and saying, no, 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 that's not true, and then taking responsibility for our emotions and being able to create the space to sit with them and articulate what's really happening, and then having the courage and vulnerability to share that to authority, to leadership. I don't like the word authority, but to share that with leadership. And I learned to do that in an organization that was not very, it wasn't a very supportive workplace mentally and emotionally. And rather than going back to my default of shutting down and making up stories and becoming defensive and thinking it's me, I was able to have the courage to share what was happening in respectful ways without fear of judgment because I found my voice. And I think that's part of the process. We have to find our voice and be able to honestly share what's going on without fear of judgment, fear of other people's opinions. And I think for me, that was a gateway into greater well being and greater learning. So I wanted to share that.
Well, and I think that's something that we're not necessarily taught how to do. And so as you're sharing that, I was thinking of an example recently where um, a, a leader was frustrated. And so, okay, then share that you're frustrated. And sorry, this is my dark, irreverent humor. It's like you don't have to run around pulling your hair out if you're frustrated. You can simply say something like, I'm feeling frustrated, and here's what I'm frustrated about. I need your support to help me gain context or clarity so that I can reduce the frustration and we can move forward. I don't know a whole lot of people that are going to know, no, screw you, I don't care.
Yeah.
There probably are a few. But to be able to name and state what's important to you or why you're feeling frustrated or why you're feeling disappointed, okay, great. Tell me more about that so that we can work together to find a way forward or to solve or reduce the frustration or the disappointment. It's just about being able to, I think, learn and develop the competency and how do we state this in a way that opens the conversation versus shuts it down.
Wonder, I'd love to hear your comment on this too, Andy, because you've worked with a lot of people around this. I wonder if some of that isn't, or partly that isn't a result of people being afraid that they don't know how to articulate what you just said. That's great. You're kind of a master at this. If I'm just a guy working in a company, I'm leading a small team and I don't have much experience at this kind of thing, I might be pretty afraid to be able to articulate my frustration to
Mhm.
someone in a way that's going to come across like you just came across. Um, so I may just not do it. The frustration, of course, is going to come up. It's going to show up. It's going to leak out everywhere. Um,
Yeah.
and so the other person will get it anyway. What they won't get is the context and what I'm frustrated about in a way that's positive. So I think part of it is that we don't learn how to do that in our families, first of all. Um, we don't learn the skill of being able to talk honestly like that with each other. I mean, I remember with me and my sister, who's the only other family member, our frustration was taken out in yelling at each other um, about stuff. Um, but we didn't have a good way to express it other than that. So what do you think, Andy? What comes up for you around this?
I think in my role and what I embrace is this idea, and this doesn't come from me, it comes from a fantastic leader. Her name is Nancy Squicciarini. I had her on the podcast recently, and she does a lot of training. She, first of all, does a lot of training for women in leadership, but not just women. And what she talks about is this idea of connection before content. And I think that's what's missing oftentimes. So
Mhm.
over the last few years, I've really tried to make that a priority. And even the idea of connection before correction, we can default to wanting to fix problems right away and make them right. And we don't give people the time and space to figure it out and help facilitate each other's thinking. So, me as a leader, it's not just me trying to solve the problem, but together, how can we, first of all, co regulate? So, that requires connection. And I think I've tried to prioritize that idea. Everybody says, yeah, people first, but it's true. But what are we actually doing? So it's for me, it's that idea of connection before content and really understanding people. And I like to explore, okay, tell me about your work experiences before. What were they like? To know the types of work experiences they've come from, the workplaces they've come from. And I don't go deep right away, and I just use it as an invitation. And it's amazing what comes up for people. People will share, oh, I just came from a great workplace. It was time to go. Like nothing bad happened. And now I'm here and I'm excited to work here. Other times you hear about the baggage they carry and their frustration with leadership. And it always stems back to, I would say 95% of the time, not feeling seen, not feeling valued, not feeling appreciated. So coming from organizations where the leader will get up there in their monthly meeting or weekly meeting and give grand shout outs across, the room to certain people, failing to understand that the people that don't get shouted out often don't feel valued and appreciated. So it's not that the leader shouldn't be giving shout outs, but there are better ways to do it, you know? And I think a lot of research shows, I actually read an article that was pretty powerful, and it talked about the power of the 7 to 15 second informal interaction. A leader walking down the hallway or the corridor and stopping and saying, listen, I know how last week was a really tough week for you and you were really frustrated, but you've really shown up this week and you've done an amazing job and I really appreciate it. Done. That took 8 seconds. And that person will suddenly feel seen, heard, valued, appreciated, and their emotion acknowledged.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's what I continue to strive to do in my work as a leader is to help people feel that sense of belonging. And it does require that idea of connection before content. And then, they're the experts doing their work. I'm not here to, of course I'm here to try to help everybody improve, including myself, but that connection is vital in establishing trusting relationships.
Mm.
So, yeah, I love that, Andy. That's great, and thank you for the reminder. That's something that I, as a coach, as a working with people on teams together, doing workshops, whatever it is, doing something like that, being aware of that. Also, kind of two things come up for me. One is that we, in order to create a world in which there is greater trust, we're all kind of responsible for that. Not kind of, we are. We are all responsible for that. It's not somebody's job to do that. It's all of us working together and taking into account that each of us has our own stuff around trust. And so being willing to be open to listen to that, hear that, and work with that. And so I was going to ask you, okay, so how, who are the people who, or I did ask you this, maybe who were the people who were your mentors along that path? But I think it's not just the people who are the mentors, it's everyone, that we all need to actually declare that together. So when I work with a team, for example, a big part of it is what are we going to do together to build trust amongst each other? and to strengthen it. What are we going to do together? If I'm coaching an individual, what are you going to do together with your people you work with and for, to strengthen trust in the organization? So this is, yeah, I think this is a big part of this. What are your thoughts?
Well, and you and I have had the pleasure of working together in the same room with
Yes.
teams.
Yes.
And I love that. I'm so grateful for that. And I think what you're saying here reminds me of the importance of giving space for people to find out, figure out, explore with compassion and curiosity, what is my own propensity to trust? Because if I don't know that about myself, then I don't know how that propensity is impacting others and my ability to build, maintain, repair, or destroy relationships. So we come full circle again back to that self-awareness. Like, I need to understand my own propensity before I can start building and designing and being committed to what I'll build together as a team or as an organization.
It's a great point.
And just to add to that, it's that idea of, and I appreciate you sharing that. And I was immediately starting to think of actionable steps. And one of the things that I've tried to do quite a bit is this idea of, you know, we use adaptive schools, the structure, which is always in our meetings, starting off with an inclusion activity. So in a past organization, the inclusion activity was, okay, everybody, you got 12 people around the table. Okay, what's your favorite movie? Each of you has like a minute. That's 12 minutes listening to people's favorite movies. And there's some light, polite giggles. Oh, yeah, I watched that. But by the time you get 6 minutes into it, you're tuned out because the brain is supposed to only connect to relevant content. So suddenly it's not like you're not a team player, but okay, enough. Or what's your favorite food or most embarrassing moment? Those types of things are fun to do superficially. And my suggestion in my last organization was we have things, real things we need to talk about that are going on in this organization that we're all impacted by and we're all struggling with. Senior leaders, middle leaders. My suggestion is let's start off with a turn and talk for 3 or 4 minutes and you share what's most on top for you or what are you struggling with most in the past week or what something a celebration whatever it is, but you give people at least the floor to share emotionally what's going on for them. So you've created a structure where that psychological safety is in place where people can share what's really going on, and then maybe a group discussion, would anybody like to share, and then you move into the agenda. So if you build these protocols into the start of meetings, I feel that you're really doubling down on psychological safety and mental health and well-being, emotional well-being as well, because you're creating a platform for people to share what's going on, and that's done with consistency. And maybe every once in a while, sprinkle in the favorite food or worst food you ever had, right? For shits and giggles, which are great. But, I think as leaders, like building those protocols are essential, as you both know in your work.
Thank you. That's an interesting, yeah, I like it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it's time to draw this conversation to a close. And so before we go, Andy, well, I just want to recap. We've kind of come full circle in a lot of ways. We've started with doing our own work, and we've come back to a great extent to doing our own work, but doing so in the context of working with others or being with others, sharing with others, being in a place where, in order to be trusting and build trust, we need to be vulnerable to others, and how we can learn to do that, in a way that is sort of what I call wise trusting, as well as being trustworthy. So thank you. I want to thank you for all of your thoughts, Andy. It's been a great conversation, as always, with you.
Thank you.
So do you want to take a moment to just tell people how they can get in touch with you and talk about your podcast and other ways that they can contact you?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. I appreciate that. So my podcast is called the Run Your Life podcast. I've been at it, I think, 12 years now, 286 episodes, I think. A real passion project of mine, and I learned so much through it, and I'm so inspired after speaking to my guests, and it just motivates me to continue to do the work. And you know what podcasting is like. It's hard work, and you got to do the research ahead of time and find guests that connect to the themes of your show. So people can find me, Andy Vasily, Run Your Life Show. As well, you can find me on LinkedIn, Andy Vasily. I'm on X as well, Andy Vasily. But I'd love to hear from people and connect with anybody who's found value in the conversation and continue the discussion. So yeah, thanks for letting me share that.
Yeah, my heart is full. So thank you for this courageous, vulnerable, connected conversation. And that gentle reminder that doing our own work doesn't mean we have to dive in the deep end. It's okay to start small. It's okay to be maybe supported or unsupported, do some reflection on your own. Always professionals are around to help. So find a good professional if that's something that you feel you need support with. But just, yeah, this gentle invitation that we don't have to dive into the deep end, that it can be small baby steps first, and that it's worth it. And that it's really, really worth it for our own selves and also for the relationships that really matter.
Yeah, that's lovely. Can I just say one last thing? Because you mentioned seeking professional help, and I just wanted to mention, we've talked about Dr. Gabor Mate, and my wife is a certified compassionate inquiry practitioner, and part of the program is free mentoring and free coaching. So if anybody listening to this would like to explore that service, then they can get in touch with me, and I can put them in touch with a mentor coach for free sessions.
It's great. Thank you.
Great.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you all, listeners. I hope you've gotten something as much and maybe even more out of this than I have and that Eli has, although I doubt it. As always, Andy, it's just I really appreciate the what you bring, the perspective that you bring to conversations like this, and being willing to be open and available for everyone.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
So until next time, trust on purpose.
On behalf of both Charles and myself, we want to say a big thank you to our producer and sound editor, Chad Penner, Hillary Rideout of Inside Out Branding, who does our promotion, our amazing graphics, and marketing for us. And our theme music was composed by Jonas Smith. If you have any questions or comments for us about the podcast, if you have a trust-related situation that you'd like us to take up in one of our episodes, we'd love to hear from you at trust@trustonpurpose.org.
And we'd also like to thank you, our listeners. Take care and keep building trust on purpose. Until next time.
Until next time.